What's going on, everybody? I had about as much fun putting this video together as I haven't one in a long time. I absolutely loved hearing your opinions from last week's question about which top tier Hall of Famers will remain hobby relevant for the foreseeable future. And your responses were great. There were a ton of responses, and it was so much fun going through them, compiling them, looking at the all the different opinions and what went into that. And we're going to take a closer look at those here in just a second. But this is also a big week for the channel because tomorrow, Tuesday, January 14th at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, I will be doing my first live stream of the year. Yes, we're doing a midlife live, and we're going to do it once a month. And the first one is tomorrow. Now, I have an awesome panel who I will be introducing. I've been kind of keeping it under wraps who they were going to be. I will introduce it during this particular video, so you won't want to miss that. I hope that you enjoy this video. I hope you'll like this upcoming week's question, but I wanted to take a different approach this week. Instead of getting in front of you and reading through things like I normally do, I kind of turned things a little bit where I got on the computer because there were so many visuals, so many responses I wanted to share, but also I crunched some numbers and calculated some percentages, and I wanted to show you all. So take a look at this super interesting perspective from all of you. And again, I look forward to seeing you tomorrow night, January 14th at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific for Midlife Live number 1. Let's check this out. So let's go ahead and get right into your comments. Now, first off, let's go ahead and look at the responses of people who only talked about baseball players. So these are the all-time top tier Hall of Famers that will always be hobby relevant, but with baseball first. Now, these are just baseball responses, and you'll see what I mean here as soon as we get going. So this first one says Cy Young, Babe Ruth, Jackie Robinson, Hank Aaron, Willie Mays, Ken Griffey Jr., Mickey Mantle, Nolan Ryan, Randy Johnson, and Ricky Henderson. So these are people to start, just baseball players. Now, I am keeping tally in the background, and I will show you the results and how they went. So the next response says, my dad actually says, Cobb, Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Mickey Mantle, Willie Mays, Jackie Robinson, and Derek Jeter. All right. So next up, this one says Ty Cobb, Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Joe DiMaggio, Jackie Robinson, Mickey Mantle, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, Roberto Clemente, Pete Rose, Nolan Ryan, Ricky Henderson, Bo Jackson. Bo Jackson, interesting one. Ken Griffey Jr. and Derek Jeter. Now, again, I'm going to show you the totals when we get moving further through this and share some thoughts and things. But first, I wanted to get through all of your responses. Next list says Babe Ruth, Mickey Mantle, Ted Williams, Joe DiMaggio, Nolan Ryan, Ty Cobb, Cal Ripken Jr., Roberto Clemente, and Jackie Robinson. These are the names, at least, that came to him right away. And those are kind of the ones we're talking about, right? Who are the people who come to mind right away? Next, top tier Hall of Famers are Ty Cobb, Honus Wagner, or Hannes Wagner, Christy Mathewson, Walter Johnson, Lou Gehrig, Ted Williams, Joe DiMaggio, Mickey Mantle, Willie Mays, Roberto Clemente, Sandy Koufax, Ernie Banks, Frank Robinson, Pete Rose, and then in parentheses he says, I know, Tom Seaver, Nolan Ryan, and Johnny Bench. Next one says, the guys that will never be forgotten that are top tier Hall of Famers are Babe Ruth, Jackie Robinson, Mickey Mantle, Hank Aaron, Ty Cobb, Michael Jordan. So this one slipped in as the baseball only, but there is a Jordan in there. Willie Mays, Cy Young, Roberto Clemente, Lou Gehrig, Joe DiMaggio, Pete Rose, Ted Williams, and Satchel Paige. Now, there's a couple of names that haven't come up yet, and I'm kind of like, what's going on? Let's keep looking and see if they do. Top tier guys. This one says Ruth. So Babe Ruth, Ty Cobb, Mickey Mantle. And then with some qualifiers, he says Shoeless Joe because of the Black Sox scandal. Some of you are saying he's not a Hall of Famer. True, but again, the parameters, you don't have to stick always right between the walls of what I list, but that may be something to consider. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. We've got Roger Maris and Hank Aaron because of breaking Ruth's record. Pete Rose because of his gambling. Again, not a Hall of Famer, but hey, who says rules have to be followed? Jackie Robinson for breaking the color barrier. Cy Young for his name being on the award. Ted Williams for being the last 400 hitter. Barry Bonds for breaking Ruth's record, and then Ohtani for his two-way play, likely to be a future Hall of Famer. And then let's keep going. Next up, it says my top tier Hall of Famers that will always be hobby relevant are Ty Cobb, Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Christy Mathewson, Honus Wagner, Cy Young, Joe DiMaggio, Jackie Robinson, Ted Williams, Mickey Mantle, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, Sandy Koufax, and Roberto Clemente. Next one, we've got Babe Ruth. Obviously a familiar name. Ruth we're hearing a lot. Gehrig we're hearing a fair amount. He has Gehrig, Mickey Mantle has been a common one. Roberto Clemente, Hank Aaron, Willie Mays, Robinson. I'm thinking that means Jackie Robinson. Could be one of the other Robinsons, but I think it's not Frank. I'm guessing it's Jackie. Nolan Ryan, Ricky Henderson. And lastly, he says Mike Trout if he ever wins a championship. Then we've got Babe Ruth, Mickey Mantle, Ty Cobb, Hammer and Hank Aaron, Jackie Robinson, Sandy Koufax, Nolan Ryan, Ken Griffey Jr., and Derek Jeter. Here's another one. We've got, I'm kind of covering it up on the screen there, but I'll read it. We've got Honus Wagner, Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Mickey Mantle, Sandy Koufax, Ted Williams, Jackie Robinson, Hank Aaron, Roberto Clemente, and then under my picture that says Ricky Henderson. Part of me is wondering if Ricky Henderson is getting more or less votes, maybe more because of his recent passing and being in the news. I don't know. We'll talk about that, though. Next, we've got Babe Ruth. We've got Lou Gehrig, Mickey Mantle, Jackie Robinson. And then he says some of the modern guys, and this is from the Penny Sleever, my friend Isaac. He says some of the modern guys who might meet the description. He goes, Ken Griffey Jr., sure. Pete Rose, I think so. And then he kind of with some question marks says Ichiro, Judge, Ohtani, kind of as maybes. But it seemed like Ruth, Gehrig, Mantle, Jackie, Griffey, and Rose seemed to be for sures for him. And then we've got another one. This one says Babe Ruth, Cy Young, Mickey Mantle, Ty Cobb, Ted Williams, Carl Yastrzemski, a name we hadn't heard yet, Roberto Clemente, Nolan Ryan, and Derek Jeter. And then we've got top tier Hall of Famers. That's easy. Again, he says Ty Cobb, Babe Ruth, Walter Johnson, Christy Mathewson, and Honus Wagner as the best of the best. Those, remember, were the inaugural class of the Hall of Fame. So he's like, yeah, the inaugural class, that first Hall of Fame class. And then he says, hey, you remember the second Hall of Fame class wasn't too shabby either. Connie Mack, John McGraw, Cy Young. Trish Speaker was in the second Hall of Fame class as well. And then he says, hey, don't forget about Bob Gibson and Satchel Paige. And he'd go to that museum, and I don't blame him. All right, this next one says I narrowed it down to 20. I didn't put any limits. You guys could have put 40 for all I care. Some people limited their list to 10, some 20. This one, he says he stopped at 20. Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Ty Cobb, Honus Wagner, Shoeless Joe, Walter Johnson, Cy Young, Joe DiMaggio, Ted Williams, Jackie Robinson, Stan Musial. First time we've heard Stan Musial's name, which is interesting. Mickey Mantle, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, Roberto Clemente, Yogi Berra for the first time, Sandy Koufax, Nolan Ryan, Ricky Henderson, and Ken Griffey Jr. And then he did a follow-up and he said, somehow I left off Jackie Robinson. So I don't know if maybe he edited that first response. That's what I think probably happened. So it looks like he took out Johnny Bench and replaced it with Jackie Robinson. Those were the baseball only lists. Now, a few people put lists from some other players of other sports and included some baseball, and some were just other sport specific. So let's go through some of those. This one says for baseball, Honus Wagner, Ty Cobb, Babe Ruth, Jackie Robinson, and Mickey Mantle. For basketball, you got George Mikan, Bill Russell. You've got Wilt Chamberlain, Lou Alcindor, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, and LeBron. And then we've got for football, he's got Thorpe, Nagurski, Brown, Namath, Montana, Tom Brady, and Patrick Mahomes. And then for hockey, he's got the great one, Wayne Gretzky, and Ovechkin, who's going to be in the news a lot over the next couple of weeks. Next, we've got Mookie Chilson says, I've got Babe Ruth, Mickey Mantle, Jackie Robinson, and Michael Jordan. The end. Unless you want to consider non-sport, in which he would include Batman. I love how his non-sport, I love you, Mookie. I love how his non-sport is not non-sport people like Thomas Edison and, Abraham Lincoln. He says non-sport, and they're all fictional characters. Well, theoretically, maybe they're not fictional. I don't know. But his non-sports are Batman, Superman, Darth Vader, and Mickey Mouse. Next, this list is a variety of sports. It is Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Mickey Mantle, Jackie Robinson, Michael Jordan, Tom Brady, and Wayne Gretzky. This next one has a variety of sports. It says for baseball, Ty Cobb, Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Joe DiMaggio, Mickey Mantle, Willie Mays, Jackie Robinson, Hank Aaron, Pete Rose, Nolan Ryan, Ricky Henderson. Ricky Henderson, Ken Griffey Jr., and Derek Jeter. For football, he says he's got Bart Starr, Jim Brown, Joe Namath, Terry Bradshaw, Joe Montana, John Elway, Jerry Rice, and Tom Brady. Then for basketball, he's got Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal, and LeBron James. And then for hockey, just Wayne Gretzky. Now, let's take a look at the top 10 baseball. So there were a couple of other lists, but these were the lists that included baseball players. So I wanted to look who were the top 10 people mentioned and who was left out of the top 10. So the top two, there was a tie. There were 19 people who submitted ballots that included baseball players. Of those 19 ballots, 18 of them included Babe Ruth, and 18 of them included Mickey Mantle, leaving them at right about 95% of the votes were for Ruth and Mantle. Not surprising. Hobby relevant, top tier Hall of Famer. Babe Ruth, Mickey Mantle makes perfect sense. Who is third?
Third was Jackie Robinson. Now, when you look at Jackie Robinson, definitely a Hall of Famer, obviously, somebody who will always stay hobby relevant, not just for what he did on the field, but even more so off the field for society and for American culture. So Jackie Robinson with 15 of 19 votes, which is about 79% of the vote. Then we've got, I put fourth and fifth together. I guess we'll just do those two together. We've got Ty Cobb was fourth with 13 of the 19 votes, so about 68%. And then fifth, Lou Gehrig. Lou Gehrig with 11 votes, putting him at about 58% of the ballots that you all submitted. That's quite a top five. If you're to take a step back and you're to ask me, who do you think the top five are? I would probably have guessed those are probably going to be the top five. Ruth, Mantle, Jackie, Ty Cobb, and Lou Gehrig. That's probably on par with what I expected. The next five, there were some guys left out that surprised me a little bit. Number 6, Hank Aaron. Not super surprising that Hank Aaron would be in the top 10. Number 6 seems about appropriate. I'm a little surprised that we haven't seen one or two of the names here, but at 7, 8, and 9, we have a tie. Willie Mays, Nolan Ryan, and Roberto Clemente. So those all seem like great names. They all seem like great players. They all seem hobby relevant. They're all at 47%. Makes sense. Don't really have an argument from me on any of these. The only argument would be that Willie Mays, Nolan Ryan, and Roberto Clemente didn't get more than half of the votes. The fact that they all got less than half of the votes, 9 out of 19 ballots, is somewhat surprising, but I think totally deserving of the top 10. And then number 10 with 8 votes was Ted Williams. So Ted Williams got 8 of the 19 ballots of people who listed baseball players, 42%. Again, Ted Williams, all-time great, certainly seems hobby relevant. But who was not on the top 10 list that it seems a little maybe harsh or certainly could have been in the top 10? Well, the ones that were notable that were left off to me were Walter Johnson, some people would argue is the best all-time pitcher, not on the top 10 list. In fact, the only pitcher on the top 10 list was Nolan Ryan. Interesting. No Honus Wagner. I thought Cy Young not being on there could have been an argument that he would. Now, Cy Young is a second ballot Hall of Famer, but Cy Young has the best pitching award named after him, and he has over 500 wins, probably the most unbreakable record in all of baseball, if you ask me. Then we've got Christy Mathewson. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer. He's an inaugural Hall of Famer. Cy Young, a second ballot, second all-time Hall of Fame inauguration. So Christy Mathewson. Joe DiMaggio didn't make the top 10. Thought that was interesting. And then Honus Wagner didn't make the top 10, another inaugural Hall of Fame guy. So Mathewson, Walter Johnson, and Honus Wagner all on the screen now as guys that I thought certainly could have been in the top 10, but weren't. All our first inauguration, and first ever Hall of Fame inauguration ballot, like all-time great. Cy Young in the second, and then Joe DiMaggio obviously was playing later on. So those are 5 guys that I thought you could make the argument would be top 10. So now let's look at 11 through 20. 11 through 20. So these are based on your ballots. So receiving 7 of 19 ballots, Cy Young with about 37%, tied with Joe DiMaggio, about 37%. Interesting to me that Cy Young and Joe DiMaggio didn't get more than 37% of the votes. 13 is a tie, a four-way tie. So we have Ken Griffey Jr. with about 32%, Ricky Henderson, Pete Rose. Now I put the little marker next to Pete Rose because, the question was top tier Hall of Famers who are always going to be hobby relevant. Now, obviously, Pete Rose isn't in the Hall of Fame. I still think he eventually gets in, but he's not yet. And so that's why that little mark is there. And then Honus Wagner. So again, Ken Griffey Jr., Ricky Henderson, Pete Rose, Honus Wagner, all tied for 13th, all receiving about a third of the votes. Number 17, Derek Jeter with 5 votes, tied with Sandy Koufax, who also received 5 votes, about 26% of the votes. And then kind of cut off at the bottom there. So you have to look at my face is Christy Mathewson with 3 votes and Walter Johnson with 3 votes. Now, first thing that jumps off to me, this kind of jumps off the screen to me, is the fact that only 3 out of 19 people said they thought Christy Mathewson and Walter Johnson are top tier Hall of Famers that will remain hobby relevant. Now, these are guys that were pitching 120 years ago. So I get it. I do get it. But only 3 votes for Christy Mathewson and 3 votes for who many consider to be the greatest pitcher who ever lived, Walter Johnson. When Walter Johnson retired, he had so many more strikeouts than everyone else. If I'm not mistaken, nobody got to 3,000 strikeouts after Walter Johnson until Bob Gibson did it, who pitched 50 years later, which is really, really interesting. That just shows how dominant Walter Johnson was, at least as a strikeout pitcher, that he went, it was 50 years before the next player reached the 3,000 strikeout mark. So I am, again, just my reactions, my thoughts, not that that means anything, is when you look at this list, Cy Young not being top 10, I understand. He's 11th. Joe DiMaggio, I'm not surprised he wasn't top 10, but it is interesting to me that he is not top 10. But it does then make sense that he would be the top of the next list, number 12. Frankly, I think Ricky Henderson is higher than I expected, because I think part of that might be now again, I've said if Ricky Henderson were to if I were to make my all-time starting lineup, I think my left fielder would be Ricky Henderson, and he would be my leadoff hitter. So I'm not sliding Ricky Henderson. I'm just surprised that he's that high on the list. So that one kind of stuck out to me. But Walter Johnson and Christy Mathewson at numbers 19 and 20, those ones really surprised me. I was not expecting that. I was not expecting that Walter Johnson might not be top 20 or Christy Mathewson was on the verge of not making the top 20. Again, not saying it's wrong, but it did surprise me without question. Now let's go back and look at a couple more things here. One of the things that also stuck out at me is people that did not make the top 20. Did not make the top 20. Satchel Paige, not top 20. Now, do I think Satchel Paige is a top tier Hall of Famer? Yes. Do I think he will always be hobby relevant? That's probably where he missed out. Now, part of it might be he doesn't have a ton of cards, right? He just has a handful of cards. He's got a beautiful 49 Leaf. He's got a beautiful 49 Bowman. He's got a beautiful 53 Tops. So that's probably the reason he's not on the list, is my guess. Yogi Berra. Now, nobody has more World Series rings than Yogi Berra. He has more than 2 handfuls. of rings, a few of them from being coach, but I mean, this guy's got 10 playing World Series rings, won multiple MVPs. I mean, and he got one vote. 1 out of 19 ballots, said Yogi Berra. That really surprised me. Now, Josh Gibson didn't get a single vote. Not a single person mentioned Josh Gibson. My guess, I think a lot of people would consider him a top tier Hall of Famer, but Josh Gibson obviously doesn't really have many cards. He's got just a couple of cards. Playing days cards is what we like to collect, not post playing days cards. So that's probably the reason that Josh Gibson didn't get any votes. Stan Musial got one vote. Now, when you look at Stan Musial's statistics, when you look at his average, when you look at his RBIs, when you look at his home runs, when you look at his production, and Stan Musial's an awesome guy, I go, interesting that Stan Musial's not on the list. Now, I think, again, it's similar to Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson. I think that, and maybe even Joe DiMaggio. I mean, if you look at Joe DiMaggio, Satchel Paige, Josh Gibson, and Stan Musial, what do they all have in common? Because none of them made the top 10. Only one of them made the top 20. What do they all have in common? There is not a clear sequential opportunity to collect their cards over their playing days years. That's what they are all missing. There are gaps for Joe DiMaggio because of World War II. There are gaps for Stan Musial because of contract issues with, the manufacturers. There are gaps for Josh Gibson and Satchel Paige because they were playing in the Negro Leagues, right? So those four guys either received 0 votes or at the most 2. I think Satchel Paige got 2 votes. Stan Musial got 1. I guess Joe DiMaggio got more, but I'm guessing the reason they didn't get more hobby love is because of that. So what does that even mean? What I think that means is we like consistency and we like being able to collect runs and know what all the cards are like. And when you have no Topps cards, but you have a Bowman card that year, but then you don't this other year, and then all of a sudden you have a Topps card, and then when you have that mismatch going on, I think that really hurts the collectability. Why do I bring this up? One of the reasons I bring this up is because I think that some of that is the reason that vintage basketball is not more collectible. Because again, there are big gaps. There's a gap between 81 and 86. There are gaps after 61, before 69. I think that the consistency is something that we like as collectors. Now, going back to the list, Johnny Bench, a lot of people would argue is not he's not on the list, but one of the reasons that he may not be on the list is he's later on, maybe, I don't know, but Ken Griffey Jr. was in there. Ricky Henderson got a lot of votes. What this list also reminds me of is that catchers don't get a lot of hobby love. I mean, Yogi Berra and Johnny Bench, nobody gave a vote for Campanella, right? Nobody gave a vote for some of the other all-time great catchers. So for whatever reason, it seems like consistency matters to us in their card production, but also catchers doesn't look like are going to, I mean, this is interesting. And then Shoeless Joe Jackson got a couple of votes. But Shoeless Joe Jackson, again, I've got the same marker because he's not a Hall of Famer, famously. So is that the reason he didn't get more votes because he's not a Hall of Famer? Because remember, Pete Rose got quite a few votes, but he's not a Hall of Famer. Shoeless Joe didn't get it. So Shoeless Joe, I think, probably has the hobby relevance without any question, but he maybe didn't get more votes because he's not a top tier Hall of Famer because he's not in the Hall of Fame. So y'all broke the rules a little bit when it came to Pete Rose there at number 15, but you weren't willing to break those same rules with Shoeless Joe. Those are just kind of my thoughts. I found this whole thing to be just insanely fascinating and had so much fun with it. Um, Now, if I look at the next thing here, there are a couple other sports that were mentioned. A couple of people went football in there, and hang with me for a second. I want to go through these real quick. But we've got Peyton Manning, Randy Moss, Brett Favre, Deion Sanders, John Elway, Dan Marino, Emmett Smith, Barry Sanders, Joe Montana, Jerry Rice, Walter Payton, Terry Bradshaw, Joe Green, Mike Ditka, Roger Staubach, Joe Namath, Johnny Unitas, Bart Starr, Jim Brown. No mention of my guy Sammy Baugh. That's okay. And O.J. Simpson. And then my guy Don, who has an incredible football card collection. He says Jim Thorpe, Red Grange, Sammy Baugh, Otto Graham, Jim Brown, John Unitas, Bart Starr, Joe Namath, Dick Butkus, Terry Bradshaw, Roger Staubach, Walter Payton, Joe Montana, Jerry Rice, and Tom Brady, which are fantastic choices. Now, here's the thing I want to point out. Some of us have limited funds. Some of us, well, let's face it, we all have limited funds. It's just whether our limit is low or our limit is high. Uh, but the whole hunt and the whole collection and trying to build a collection that we like, that represents whatever it is that we want represented in our collection, is super fun. And I think that, when you are forecasting what you expect to happen with card prices, it plays a role for a lot of us in what we buy. If we thought that a player was going to be hobby irrelevant in 3 years, we would probably wait 3 years to buy their cards, right? If you thought that a guy was going to be forgotten, you probably would wait to buy their cards because there's no urgency. When you look at the cards that were like, because one of the questions I ask all the time, and I've never really heard this response, but one of the questions I ask all the time is, how do you decide what card you're going to buy next? We all have a list. We all have a list of cards that we want. And and I'm always curious as to, okay, you go to the National and most things you can imagine are there. How do you decide what thing you're going to buy that time? And I think a lot of people would respond, well, I'm going to buy the card that I see that has the condition that I like. So if I've got 10 cards on my list and I find one of those 10 cards and the price is right and the condition is right and the eye appeal is right, that's when I buy that card. But I think that some of us, at least myself to a certain extent, another factor that plays in is if we think the card might go up soon. If you thought Jackie Robinson cards were going to go up a lot over the next 3 years, but you thought Yogi Berra cards weren't, wouldn't you be more inclined to buy the Jackie Robinson card today and then wait to buy the Yogi Berra? Because there's no sense of urgency. There's no rush. It's going to still be affordable in 3 years if you don't think it's going to continue to climb. But if you thought a card was imminent to climb in value, wouldn't that move it higher on your list? It's that whole sense of urgency. If you thought home prices were about to go way up and you knew you needed to move, wouldn't you want to feel some pressure? Aren't you feeling pressure? Aren't you wanting to get the ball rolling and get out and buy that house before the prices go up? Probably, right? So I think that something that plays a role for all of us is what we think prices are going to do. Now, that's not to say that we're investors. that you can be a collector, and I think most of us are part collector, part investor, and that amount is always changing. I do think that. But I also think that, what we think is going to happen with prices affects what we're going to buy sooner rather than later because of the affordability of those cards. And so that's one of the things I like about this question, and I like thinking about this question is, who's always going to have the high demand? Who's always going to be hobby relevant? Those guys I should buy sooner rather than later, because some of those guys will just become more and more and more unforgotten if that's the trend that I think that they're eventually headed. So some of these Hall of Famers that aren't the top tier Hall of Famers and aren't going to stay hobby relevant or have become more irrelevant, then that might affect what I do and when I do it. And so at the start of this year, as we're kind of planning out what our strategy is, what we want to buy, making our lists, kind of reorganizing our thoughts, I thought this would be an interesting conversation to have. Now, I'm going to continue this conversation tonight. No, not tonight. What day is today? Today's Monday. I'm going to continue this conversation tomorrow, Tuesday night at 6 p.m. Pacific. That's 9 p.m. Eastern. So I should always say it Eastern first. I live Pacific, so that's why I do that. 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific on Tuesday, January 14th. I'm going to have a live stream, and I'm going to be doing these live streams once a month with different guests as a way to connect better with everybody and have live interaction and answer questions live. And the topic for tomorrow, January 14th, at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, is this topic. Now, what I did is I chose 3 guests, and those 3 guests are people who I think have amazing collections and have been spending with budgets that allow them to go after. Because like some of us go, I'd love to have a Babe Ruth card, but it's not in my hobby budget. So I wanted to find some people who, if they wanted to go after Ruth, that was an option. If they wanted to go after Jeter, that's an option. If they want to go after Walter Johnson or Ty Cobb, those are all options. Those are all on the table. And so if every player and every card, not every card, but every player and their cards are on the table, who would they go after? So what I did is I lined this up a couple of weeks ago, and I asked them for their list of top tier Hall of Famers that will always be hobby relevant. And I have a feeling that if they watched this before tomorrow night's Tuesday, January 14th, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, the live stream, I have a feeling they're going to see a couple of names that they left off their list. And don't worry, guys. I plan on bringing those names up with them because they each submitted their list. So we're going to go through their lists. Who did they agree on? Who did they not agree on? Who did they leave out? Who did they agree with on Midlife Nation's responses, and who did they not? So the first episode of 2025 Midlife Live is tomorrow night. So who are these guests? Well, let's take a look here.
All right. This panel is going to be awesome. I can't wait for you to hear their thoughts on this topic. The first one, you will recognize him, especially if you're a friend of the channel, because this is my brother from another mother. We've done many streams together. We've done many, collaborations. This is my guy, Darren, Return to Collecting. He will be on the esteemed panel tomorrow night. Again, you're going to want to check this out because we're going to have fun. Now, opinions are always welcome on live streams, so it would be fun to have somebody with strong opinions. Agreed? Well, this next guy, he definitely has strong opinions, and he's not afraid to share them. So who is it? Oh yeah, it is Mr. Mike Petty will be joining us. Now, these two guys have awesome collections, and that's one of the reasons they are terrific choices for this particular panel. And speaking of awesome collections, a newcomer to the game of YouTube and one of the best up-and-coming channels that recently launched, and an amazing collection in his own right, will be rounding us out. So who is that? Oh yeah, my guy Tony, the Southern Collector. 3 of the best collections I know of. These guys have some fire in their collection. So, who they think are going to be the all-time greats who will stay hobby relevant, to me, oh man, there are not 3 opinions that I want to hear more than these guys. So when is it? Again, tomorrow, Tuesday, January 14th, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. You won't want to miss it. Live stream on my channel, Midlife Sports Cards.
What do you all think? I think this is going to be a lot of fun. I'll unveil Tony's list. I'll unveil Mike Petty's list. I'll unveil Darren's list. I'll ask them why they left off who they left off. I'll ask your questions that you leave in the chat. This is going to be a lot of fun. I hope you'll join us again tomorrow, Tuesday, January 14th, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. You won't want to miss that. But first, before I go, I do have my question for this coming week. So this week's question is as follows. And let's get me out of the way. There we go. This week's question is as follows. Does thinking about and considering who will be forgotten or potentially forgotten and who won't be potentially forgotten affect who you want to collect? Or is it irrelevant in regards to how you collect cards? So what am I asking? What I'm asking is, after considering this, after considering which players will stay hobby relevant, which players will maybe become hobby irrelevant, does thinking about that affect how you collect? Do you say, you know what, that's true? I don't know if they'll remember Luis Aparicio in 25 years. So if I'm going to build a collection, I want it to be guys that they will remember. Maybe I should stop buying cards of guys like, and Ernie Banks was never mentioned. Harmon Killebrew was never mentioned. Should I stop buying Harmon Killebrew and start buying more Aaron and Mays and Mantle? Because nobody mentioned Killebrew. Nobody mentioned Al Kaline. Does it affect how you collect, or does how you collect, is it irrelevant to who will remain hobby relevant? Let me know your thoughts for next week's question. Join us tomorrow night. I think it's going to be a blast.